Welcome back. We're still on module 2.2 looking at population ecology. And so in the last lecture, we were specifically talking about factors that influence population growth. And we went through the definitions of exponential growth, logistic growth, and carrying capacity. So ultimately, what we're going to be starting to talk about is what influences population growth. So anything that affects the size of one population could affect the size of on other populations. And in the book, we have the example of moose interacting with predators, in this case, wolves. So understanding the number of moose that are killed in a given year is dependent on the wolf population. And ultimately, when we're talking about population density, it's the number of organisms in a given area. So your book, it gives us this fantastic example again of moose, wolves, and trees. And what we can start to see is how these organisms affect one another. So when we see the wolf population going down, we see that correspondingly the moose population goes up. So we're seeing how the wolf population is influencing the moose population. And we can zoom out even further to understand what is happening with trees. So as the wolf population goes down, the moose population goes up, and the result of this is slower tree growth. And we're going to be looking into this a little bit more specifically in community ecology, where we're understanding how these different levels affect one another. But ultimately, we're sticking with population ecology in this section. So we're looking specifically at one of these levels rather than the interaction between them. So we're understanding, for example, the moose population year by year, and we understand that when the moose population is high, we expect that the wolf population to be low. And again, this is a closed system, so we're able to make those assumptions. Ultimately, what we're talking about when we're looking at interactions between a predator and a prey, we're looking at something that we call in ecology density-dependent factors. So this is when a factor influences the population size and growth on a number of other individuals. So the example with this would be predation. So you see how wolves influence the number of moose that are circulating in a population. So this is a density-dependent factor because it depends on the amount of one species on another. A density-independent factor, however, are things that influence a population that have nothing to do with population size. So it's a factor that influences the population size, but does not, sorry, let me back up. So a density-independent factors are factors that influence your population size, but doesn't depend on how big that population actually is. So a great example of that would be weather. So weather doesn't, like a giant forest fire, it doesn't matter how many deer there are in an area. If there's a devastating wildfire, that population size of deer is going to go down. However, when we look at a density-dependent factor, the number of wolves ultimately is going to impact the number of moose that are circulating. So again, this is density-dependent factors. And this is a great picture that's looking at both density-dependent factors and density-independent factors, but adding another level to it, which is biotic factors and abiotic factors. So basically, living components of an environment that affect a population. So again, we've been using predators as our primary example. So we have in the presence of wolf, the moose population goes down, and this is a biotic factor because we're talking about the population of moose, and it's density dependent. However, when we think about something like temperature, high summer temperatures can cause stress in the moose and increase insect parasitism. So here we have a abiotic factor that is density independent. So spend a little bit of time sort of thinking through what might be some examples of density independent factors, which are biotic, and then density dependent factors, which tend to be biotic functions of the environment. So just to give us a good summary of what we looked at in Module 2.1 and in Module 2.2, this is just giving you an overview of the important conclusions that we went through. First of all, ecology is ultimately a study of interactions among organisms and between organisms and their environment, and that that ecology is ultimately divided into a number of levels. We talked about specifically distribution patterns and how we might describe different populations. We talked about population growth and what might influence population growth. We talked about carrying capacity, which is the maximum population size that any area can support. And ultimately, we examined what factors might influence population growth, including biotic and abiotic factors, and density independent and density dependent factors. These are all ways that ecologists and population ecologists can describe a specific population of individuals and the type of vocabulary that goes into understanding population level ecology. Thanks so much. My cat discovered spring. All right, have a good evening. We'll come back in Module 2.3.